I kept paying for a safe deposit box for almost 9 years. A safe deposit box I'd never opened. And when I finally did, I discovered my father had been hiding a secret his entire life. But before I tell you what was inside, let me ask you something. If a bank kept charging you every year for a box you didn't even remember owning, would you open it immediately? Or would you keep putting it off? Like I did? Because what started as a simple trip to the bank became the strangest chapter of my life. I found this story buried deep on Reddit after hours of searching. And honestly, the ending stayed in my head for days. Here's what happened. My father died when I was 26. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just one of those quiet endings that seem impossible until they're real. He'd been sick for a while. The kind of illness that slowly becomes part of everyday life. Hospital visits. Medication schedules. Phone calls from doctors. Little routines nobody wants, but everybody eventually learns. By the time he passed away, I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Nobody ever is. The strange thing about losing someone isn't the big moments. It's the small ones. The random times you reach for your phone before remembering. The empty chair at family dinners. The voice you suddenly realize you'll never hear again. For months after the funeral, life felt like it was happening to someone else. I went to work, paid bills, answered emails, did everything I was supposed to do, but it all felt automatic, like I was operating on autopilot. Then came the paperwork. And trust me, nobody talks about the paperwork. After someone dies, there are forms, accounts, insurance documents, tax records, boxes of old papers nobody has looked at in years. One weekend, my mother and I spent nearly 12 hours sorting through files. Most of it was boring. Bank statements, receipts, warranty cards for appliances we didn't even own anymore. Then I found a small envelope. Nothing special about it. Just an ordinary envelope tucked between old documents. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A bank statement. At first, I almost threw it away. Then something caught my attention. An annual charge. Small. Easy to miss. But it had been appearing every year. The description read, Safe Deposit Box Rental. I frowned. Because I had never heard my father mention a safe deposit box. Not once. I showed it to my mother. She looked just as confused. What safe deposit box? I asked. She shrugged. I have no idea. That was strange. My parents told each other everything. Or at least I thought they did. Still, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was probably old paperwork. Maybe the box had been closed years ago. Maybe the charge was a mistake. A few days later, I called the bank. Mostly out of curiosity. The woman on the phone checked the account. Then paused. A long pause. The kind that instantly gets your attention. Finally, she said, No, sir. The box is still active. My stomach tightened. What do you mean active? The rental fees are being paid automatically every year. I sat there silently. Because suddenly, this wasn't an old document. It was something current. Something real. Something my father had maintained for years. The bank explained that ownership had transferred to his estate, which meant the responsibility now belonged to me, including the annual fees. At first, I planned to visit immediately. Then life happened. Work got busy. A project deadline appeared. A friend got married. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. And somehow, I never went. Every now and then I'd remember the box. Usually when I saw the charge appear, I'd tell myself, I'll deal with it next month. Then next month became next year. And next year became several years. Looking back now, that sounds ridiculous. But that's how people work sometimes. The unknown feels easier to ignore than confront, especially when it belongs to someone you've lost. Part of me worried that opening the box would feel like closing the last chapter of my father's life. And I wasn't ready for that. So I avoided it. Year after year. Until one morning, 9 years later, a letter arrived from the bank. Official. Urgent. The kind of envelope nobody likes receiving. I opened it at the kitchen table, half expecting some billing issue. Instead, I found a notice. According to the letter, the bank was updating its storage policies. Any inactive safe deposit boxes would soon require verification. If ownership wasn't confirmed within 60 days, access could become significantly more complicated. I read the notice 3 times, then looked at the calendar. For the first time in nearly a decade, I couldn't postpone it anymore. The following Friday, I took a day off work, drove to the bank, and asked about the box. The employee behind the desk typed something into her computer. Then her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. She looked at the screen, then looked at me, then back at the screen. A second time. Finally, she stood up. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office. Several minutes passed. When she returned, she wasn't alone. The branch manager was with her. And suddenly, the atmosphere felt very different. The manager shook my hand, then said something I'll never forget. "Mr. Carter, before you open the box, there's something you should know." The branch manager looked at me for a moment. Then he asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Has anyone in your family ever mentioned this box to you?" I shook my head. "No, not once." The manager exchanged a glance with the employees standing beside him. That instantly made me nervous, because people only exchange looks like that when they know something you don't. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's go downstairs." Downstairs? I hadn't expected that. For some reason, I'd imagined a small room behind the counter, not a locked elevator requiring a security key. A few minutes later, we entered a quiet hallway lined with metal doors, the kind of place that felt frozen in time. The manager stopped in front of one particular box, then handed me a key. My hands felt strangely heavy. 9 years. 9 years of wondering. 9 years of avoiding this moment. And now it was finally here. I inserted the key, turned it, and slowly pulled the box out. The first thing I noticed was what wasn't inside. No stacks of cash. No gold bars. No expensive jewelry. Honestly, part of me felt relieved, because suddenly this felt less like a movie and more like something my father would actually leave behind. Inside were only a handful of items. An old cassette tape, several photographs, a small notebook, a brass key, and a sealed envelope. Everything looked old. Very old. The envelope immediately caught my attention. Written across the front in my father's handwriting were 6 words. "Read this last." I mean it. I actually laughed. Because anybody who's ever been told not to do something knows exactly what happens next. You want to do it immediately. Still, I resisted. For now. Instead, I picked up the photographs. Most of them were black and white. Some showed people I didn't recognize. Others looked like family gatherings, birthday parties, picnics, ordinary moments. But there was something strange. My father appeared in almost every picture. Yet he looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. The smile was different. The posture was different. The expression was different. Almost like I was looking at a version of him I'd never known. Then I noticed someone else. A woman. She appeared again and again throughout the photographs. Standing beside him. Laughing with him. Looking directly into the camera. I stared at her face, trying to place her. But I couldn't. She wasn't my grandmother. She wasn't any aunt I knew. She wasn't anyone I'd ever seen before. The more I looked at the pictures, the stranger things felt. Because whoever she was, she seemed important. Very important. Then I opened the notebook. The pages were yellow with age. Some entries were short. Others filled entire pages. Most were dated decades earlier. At first the notes seemed random. Addresses, names, phone numbers, little reminders. Nothing unusual. Until I reached one page near the middle. There was only a single sentence written there. Just one. No explanation. No context. Nothing. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. The sentence said, "Everything you know about our family is wrong." I felt a chill run through me. The room suddenly seemed quieter. The air heavier. I turned the page. Nothing. Another page. Nothing. It was as if my father had deliberately written that sentence and left no explanation. Almost like he knew exactly what it would do. almost like he wanted me to keep digging. I spent nearly an hour examining every item inside the box. The photographs, the notebook, the cassette tape, the brass key. Each object felt connected somehow. I just couldn't see how. Eventually, I placed everything back inside, except the envelope, the one marked, "Read this last." I stared at it for a very long time. Then I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the first page. The opening sentence immediately made my heart stop. "Son, if you're reading this, then I never found the courage to tell you the truth myself." I kept reading, and with every line, the world I thought I understood started to fall apart. "Son, if you're reading this, then I never found the courage to tell you the truth myself." I must have read that sentence 5 times. Not because it was complicated, because it felt wrong. My father wasn't the kind of man who avoided difficult conversations. At least that's what I believed. Yet here I was, standing in a bank, reading a letter he had hidden for nearly a decade. I took a deep breath, then continued. The next few paragraphs weren't shocking. At first, my father talked about growing up, his childhood, the town where he was raised, the people who shaped him, normal memories, the kind of stories parents tell all the time. Then everything changed. Halfway down the page, I found a sentence that made my heart stop. "I was not born into the family, you know." I blinked. Read it again. Then again. My father was adopted. The realization hit me like a truck. Not because adoption is unusual, but because nobody had ever mentioned it. Not once. My grandparents were gone. Most of their generation was gone. And somehow this secret had survived all of them. For decades. I kept reading. According to the letter, my father learned the truth when he was 18. By accident. One misplaced document. One forgotten file. And suddenly the life he thought he understood didn't make sense anymore. He spent years searching for answers. Years. But every lead disappeared. Every clue ended in another dead end. Eventually, he stopped looking. Or at least that's what he told everyone. Then I noticed something. Near the bottom of the page. A sentence underlined twice. I never stopped searching. The room suddenly felt colder. Because now the notebook made sense. The names. The addresses. The phone numbers. They weren't random notes. They were clues. My father had been investigating his own past for decades. And nobody knew. Not even my mother. I left the bank carrying the box, my mind racing the entire drive home. That evening I spread everything across my dining table. Photographs, notebook, cassette tape, key, letter. For hours I searched for connections. But the more I looked, the more confused I became. Around 8 o'clock my sister called. She was stuck at work and needed someone to watch my nephew Noah for the night. Normally I would have said yes immediately. But honestly, my head was a mess. Still, family is family. So an hour later Noah was sitting on my couch, 9 years old, full of energy, and absolutely refusing to sleep. Usually I'd have patience. That night I didn't. My mind kept drifting back to the letter, back to the photographs, back to everything my father had hidden. Then I remembered something. A small children's bedtime storybook I'd picked up recently. Just 15 pages. Simple stories. Nothing fancy. Out of desperation more than anything. I started reading it to him. One page. Then another. Then another. The stories were calm. Gentle. Exactly the opposite of what was happening inside my head. And by the time we reached page 15, Noah was asleep. Completely asleep. The house finally became quiet. For the first time all day, I sat back down at the table. And that's when I noticed something I'd missed. Something hidden inside the notebook. A folded piece of paper wedged between 2 pages. I carefully pulled it out. My pulse immediately sped up. Because it wasn't another note. It was a storage locker receipt. Dated 11 years earlier. And written across the top, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words. Only if I fail. I stared at the receipt. Then at the brass key from the safe deposit box. The key suddenly made sense. It wasn't for a house. It wasn't for another bank box. It belonged to the storage locker. The storage locker my father had hidden from everyone. including me. The next morning I drove across town, following the address on the receipt. An old storage facility stood at the edge of an industrial area. Most of the units looked abandoned, forgotten, silent. The manager checked the locker number, then looked at me strangely. Very strangely. "You're related to Mr. Carter?" I nodded. The manager swallowed, then said something that made my blood run cold. "You're the first person who's come for this." He told me someone would eventually. Then the manager led me down a long hallway, stopped in front of a metal door, and handed me the key. My father's key. The same key that had been sitting inside the safe deposit box all these years. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door, pulled it open, and froze. Because sitting alone in the center of the storage unit was another safe deposit box. And taped to the top was a note with my name on it. I stared at the note for several seconds. My name was written on it. Not typed. Not printed. Handwritten. By my father. The same handwriting from the letter. The same handwriting from the notebook. The same handwriting I'd seen my entire life. For a moment I couldn't move. Because suddenly, this wasn't some old family mystery. It felt personal. Very personal. Slowly, I peeled the note from the box, my hands shaking slightly. The message was short. Only 2 sentences. "You're closer than I ever was. And if you're reading this, I finally found them." I froze. Found them. Not find them. Found. Past tense. My father had found his biological family. After decades of searching. The realization hit me instantly. Everything changed. The notebook. The addresses. The names. The photographs. The storage locker. None of it was about searching. It was about preserving what he found. I immediately opened the second safe deposit box. Inside were 3 items. Only 3. A stack of letters, a newspaper clipping, and a photograph. I grabbed the photograph first. And the second I saw it, my heart nearly stopped. Because I recognized one of the people. Not from the notebook. Not from the storage unit. Not from the bank. From my own childhood. A woman. Standing beside my father. The same woman I'd seen in the first set of photographs. The woman I couldn't identify. Only now I knew exactly who she was. Or at least who I thought she was. Growing up, my father used to receive birthday cards every year from someone named Margaret. Every single year. Without fail. The cards always arrived. The handwriting was neat. The messages were short. And my father always smiled when he read them. I remember asking once who she was. He simply said, "An old friend." Nothing more. At the time I believed him. Now I wasn't so sure. Because the woman in the photograph was Margaret. There was no doubt. I turned the picture over. And found writing on the back. My father's handwriting again. Just 5 words. My sister after 40 years. I couldn't breathe. Sister. Not friend. Not neighbor. Not coworker. Sister. My father's biological sister. The person he'd spent decades searching for. The person he eventually found. I sat down on the cold floor of the storage unit, trying to process everything. Because suddenly I realized something. My father had a family. An entire family. People I never knew existed. People who technically shared my blood. And somehow, he kept all of it secret. Then I reached for the letters. There were dozens. Some opened. Some unopened. The oldest dated nearly 20 years earlier. I started reading. And within minutes, tears were forming in my eyes. The letters weren't dramatic. They weren't full of shocking revelations. They were ordinary. Painfully ordinary. Brothers and sisters catching up on lost time. Stories about childhood memories. Conversations about birthdays. Holidays. Jobs. Families. The kind of relationship most people take for granted. Except my father had missed 40 years of it. 40 years. Because neither side knew the other existed. The more I read, the more emotional it became. They weren't trying to rebuild decades. They were trying to make the most of whatever time remained. Then I found the newspaper clipping. At first it seemed unrelated. Just an article from years ago. But one name immediately stood out. Margaret. The same Margaret. My father's sister. The article wasn't celebrating something. It was an obituary. My heart sank. Margaret had passed away years earlier, which explained why the birthday card stopped, why the letters ended, why my father suddenly stopped talking about his mysterious friend. For several minutes I just sat there, silent, reading the article over and over. Then something slipped from inside the clipping. A folded page, hidden between the newspaper folds. I carefully unfolded it, and instantly recognized the handwriting. My father's. At the top he had written, "The truth I couldn't tell anyone." My pulse started racing, because for the first time, this wasn't about finding his biological family anymore. This was about why he kept them secret. And judging by the first sentence, the reason was far bigger than I ever imagined. I didn't hide them because I was ashamed. I hid them because someone else's life depended on it. I stared at the page, completely frozen. What did that even mean? Whose life? Why would a family reunion need to be hidden? And what had my father been protecting all these years? I turned to the next page, and what I read there changed everything. Perfect. This is where we pay off everything. The safe deposit box, the storage locker, the adoption secret, Margaret, the letters, why the father kept everything hidden. The ending shouldn't be about treasure. It should be about love, sacrifice, and family. Part 5. I turned the page, and immediately understood why my father never told anyone. The story wasn't about him. Not really. It was about someone else. Someone he'd spent years protecting. The next few pages explained everything. After finding Margaret, my father eventually met the rest of his biological family. Brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. People he had spent 40 years wondering about. People who had spent 40 years wondering about him. At first everything was wonderful. Or at least that's how he described it. There were phone calls, visits, photographs, birthday cards. The family he'd lost had suddenly become real. Then one day, Margaret told him something. Something she had hidden for years. One of their biological brothers had a daughter. A young woman named Emily. Emily had been diagnosed with a serious illness as a child. The treatments were expensive. The future uncertain. The family struggled for years. My father wrote that meeting Emily changed him. Because she reminded him of something. Time. How quickly it disappears. How precious it becomes when you don't know how much is left. Over the following years, my father quietly helped them. Medical bills, travel expenses, whatever they needed. Not because they asked. Because he wanted to. Because after spending decades searching for his family, he wasn't about to lose them again. Then came the part that hit me the hardest. My father explained why nobody in our family knew. Not my mother. Not me. Not anyone. Because Emily didn't want people to know. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want pity. She wanted a normal life. And my father respected that. So he kept her secret. For years. Even when it became difficult. Even when people questioned where some of his money was going. Even when it would have been easier to explain everything. He stayed silent. Then I reached the final page. The last page. The page that made the entire journey make sense. The words weren't addressed to Margaret. Or Emily. Or anyone from his biological family. They were addressed to me. Son, if you've made it this far, then you've learned the truth. I stopped for a moment, just staring at the page. Then continued. You probably think this story is about adoption. It isn't. You probably think it's about finding family. It isn't. It's about choosing family. I felt my throat tighten. Because suddenly I understood. My father had spent decades searching for where he came from. But in the end, that wasn't what mattered most. The people who raised him were his family. The people he found later were his family. The people he loved were his family. Family wasn't one group. It was all of them. Together. Then came the final paragraph. The last thing my father ever wanted me to know. If I left you money, you'd spend it. If I left you property, you'd inherit it. But if I left you this story, you'd understand me. At that point I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Because for 9 years, I thought my father had left behind a forgotten safe deposit box. Something unimportant. Something I'd ignored. The truth was completely different. The box wasn't an inheritance. It was a message. A message he never found the courage to say out loud. A message he trusted me to discover when I was ready. A few months later, I reached out to the remaining members of his biological family. Some of them already knew about me. Some didn't. But every single one welcomed me. Not because of blood. Not because of obligation. Because of him. Because of the man who spent decades trying to connect two halves of his life. Today, the photograph of my father and Margaret sits on my desk, right beside the final letter. Sometimes I look at it and wonder how different things would have been if I'd opened that box sooner. Maybe I would have met some of them while my father was still alive. Maybe not. That's the thing about life. You don't always get perfect timing. You only get the choices in front of you. And sometimes, the things we keep postponing become the things that matter most. I spent 9 years avoiding a safe deposit box. And inside it, I found my father's entire life. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy emotional Reddit stories, family secrets, and true confessions, consider subscribing and following for more. One final question. If you discovered a secret about your family years after someone passed away, would you want to know the truth? Or would you rather leave the past untouched? Let me know in the comments.